Hey guys, welcome back to the A-Level Lessons Lit series. Today, we're doing Sylvia Plath's Poppies in October. And first, of course, let's look at the title, Poppies in October. Poppies are generally flowers that bloom in spring in temperate climates, but October, at least in the northern hemisphere where Plath wrote, was very much in the late autumn leading up to winter, so that already gives us a sort of foreshadowing for their symbolism and what this poem will discuss. And with that in mind, we move on to the first verse. Even the sun clouds this morning cannot manage such skirts, nor the woman in the ambulance whose red heart blooms through her coat so astoundingly. The mention of sun clouds in the morning is an obvious use of imagery here. One can imagine the beautiful, hot, reddish-yellow clouds that we often see at sunrise. And notably, morning is a time that Plath really likes to write about. We see it in Ariel when she's riding her horse, and of course we see it in Sheep and Fog, the poem that this channel has previously discussed. Cannot manage such skirts implies a sense of competition between the sun clouds and the poppies, yes, but also sort of imbibes the imagery with a sense of femininity and maybe even sexuality. Because if you Google images of red poppies, you will see that their petals often look like upturned skirts facing the viewer from above. But we don't have that much time to focus on the imagery because the next line immediately directs our attention to a woman in the ambulance. We're not given any context whatsoever for why the woman is in the ambulance, and it's an abrupt shift from natural beauty to something else entirely, as well as a sort of insinuation of hurt and something being damaged. The next line is a lot more interesting because it shows off a bunch of techniques and motifs that Plath really likes to use. The first one, most obviously, is the color motif represented in red heart. Plath often likes to use red to symbolize life, but also the obligations of life, as we see in Tulips, another poem in this collection. The word blooms itself is a sort of semi-pun, because obviously it's a reference to how the poppies are blooming in this poem, but it is also a reference to a common image used to describe blood patterns, especially when blood spills over certain fabrics. And there's a sort of throwaway detail that I personally find very interesting. When the red heart blooms through her coat, the woman's coat becomes a red coat, which is a sort of symbol used for Plath's own struggle with her transatlantic identity, being an American who moved to the United Kingdom to be with her husband. This symbol becomes a lot more important in another poem of hers in the collection, Cut, so I'll be going into greater detail on it when I cover that poem. This is just a small detail that I like to talk about. And of course, when we move on to the word astoundingly, there is a sort of grotesque beauty in the way that blood is spilling onto the woman's coat. And that is sort of a running theme in the whole of Plath's collection. Beauty in what seems to be grotesque or disturbing. The second verse seems to add on to this theme with a gift, a love gift, utterly unasked for by a sky. And right from the onset, there's very obvious repetition with a gift, a love gift. But it's fascinating because gifts usually have a positive connotation, and a love gift in particular seems to add on to the idea of seduction or sexuality in Manage Such Skirts, but can also link to the idea of being courted by something that's not exactly fully human, as seen in Fever 103 Degrees. But the gift isn't everything that it appears, because the next line immediately tells us that it is utterly unasked for, which adds a degree of reluctance and, dare I say, creepiness to what, once again, should be an ostensibly positive gift. And the speaker claims that the person who didn't ask for the gift was the sky, but the speaker might also metaphorically be the sky here. And we should also note that due to the sky and the speaker's location, they would be peeking up at the skirts. But we move on to talk about the gift itself. It is described as palely and flammily, igniting its carbon monoxides by eyes dulled to a halt under boulders. Now, palely and flammily obviously refers to fire and possibly death, motifs which are referenced in Getting There and Fever 103 Degrees, because the red of the poppies looks very much like the red of a flame. Of course, I would be amiss not to note that yes, Plath did die of carbon monoxide poisoning by her own hand, but still it's sort of interesting to note that carbon monoxide is what Plath associates the poppies with, instead of opiates, which are derived from poppies themselves and whose relationship with the flower she actually explores in another poem, Poppies in July. But no, instead we get carbon monoxide produced by the flames themselves, and we see in the next line that they are dulled to a halt, which is odd because one often thinks of the red of poppies as being extremely bright and sort of eye-catching, and that's another thing, the dullness of the poppies, the paleness that we see not only in Poppies in October, but also in Poppies in July. And the bowler hats here are just a note of societal convention, as was typical and perhaps a little archaic by the time Plath was writing this poem in the early 20th century. But it's the last verse of this poem that really packs the emotional impact and probably has the greatest room for different interpretations. Oh my God, what am I, that these late mouths should cry open in a forest of frost in a dawn of cornflowers. And here, the speaker actually acknowledges that they are, or at least that they believe they are, the true recipient of the gift, as opposed to the sky. And this line, oh my God, what am I, has really had a lot of different takes. The first time I read it as a sort of, oh, you couldn't possibly, a sort of humility at getting such a beautiful gift. But I do have friends who interpret this instead as horror or a shock at what they are, such that the universe had to conspire to give them such a, quote, gift. That these late mouths should cry open again has two of Plath's most favourite techniques. First, we get a pun with late, not only suggesting that the poppies are late for their typical blooming season, being in October, but also the idea of late as in something or someone is dead. And we also get personification with cry open, an expression of pain, perhaps by something that would traditionally be regarded as inanimate. Note also that it's sort of the personification at play, making inanimate objects seem more alive than the actually alive speaker, because while the poppies are said to cry open, the speaker is instead compared to the very much not alive sky. In a forest of frost, in the dawn of cornflowers, gives us two ending images. We have the forest of frost, contrasting with the flame of the poppies, and we also have a dawn of cornflowers, providing another source of contrast to the poppies, since cornflowers are weeds that survive no matter what and in any season, as compared to the presumably fragile poppies. So now we've gone through the entire poem line by line, let's talk a little bit about what's the vibe of this poem. I think that the speaker is pretty stunned, perhaps a little horrified at something so uncharacteristic of the season. I think it's very much framed as an attempt to look for and understand signs. And because of that, I think that it's good for essays about death, injury, symbolism, surprises, colors, and nature. So yeah, that's all for Poppies in October. If some things I said or did didn't quite make sense, then check out my earlier video on Sheep in Fog by Sylvia Plath, in which I talk about, well, sheep in fog, but also introduce the entire Ariel series and the approach that I will be taking. I know I promised y'all in that video that I would do a video last week, but that clearly didn't happen for, reasons, so I'm a little irregular. But there is one surefire way to know whenever I post a video or whenever I do not, and that's called hitting that subscribe button. But if, for whatever reason, you don't want to do that, leave a like or a comment so the algorithm will tell you anyway. That's all from me, folks. See y'all soon.